I've met a lot of Special Forces servicemen in my life, and one thing is a constant: they want to serve. And often, even once they're out, once they've finished their service, they're trying to find new ways to serve, whether it's working for charities, whether it's starting issue-focused groups, or maybe running for elected office. Brian Mast, a former Army Ranger, and he's a bomb technician as well, and veteran of Afghanistan, is no exception. He's running for Florida's 18th Congressional District, and he's here with me now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I was kind of joking with you a little, like, right before we went on air, saying that, well, maybe perhaps, what you experienced in Afghanistan has prepared you from the bomb throwing and the ridiculousness of running for elected office. Why would you, out of all of the ways to serve people, I think people who run for elected office, and I think people who obviously serve in the military, are cut from a completely different cloth from those of us who look at elected office and like, we would sooner run away than go in and serve.
I don't know that we're always originally cut from a different cloth, but after that time in service, we become a piece of a different cloth. I tell people there are very specific lessons that I learned as a result of serving in the military.
Right.
One of the things that you learn from your leaders is that the best leaders, they don't ask people to do something that they're not going to do themselves. That's a very important lesson that I think Washington, D.C. definitely needs to learn.
Right. Well, what made you, after you came back home, what was it? What was the ultimate point when you were thinking about, you decided, I'm going to do it, I'm going to run for office? Because, you've already served your country. Why run for elected office?
I don't think, like you said, service doesn't stop for any of us. You ask any American, say, tell me about yourself. They're going to tell you about the work that they do, the work of their own hands. That's
right.
how we as Americans define ourselves. And so as anybody in the military, I define myself in service to my country, just like all those other service members.
Right.
And so it happened very quickly. When I was laying in a bed in Walter Reed, I quickly realized that, service isn't going to stop here. Even though I can't jump out of planes and rope out of helicopters,
right.
I need to find a way to keep serving.
Right. Because Florida, from what I understand, I know we have wildlife in here today. It's like we're going to have Jack Hanna walk in here next.
That'd be an exciting piece.
Wouldn't it be? I know.
Yeah.
How has the Florida Republican Party, because from what I understand, and I have not, I only know Florida politics. I've only ever lived in Missouri and Texas, so I'm not quite sure. I just know from what I understand, it's a very tight-knit kind of group. Republicans like certain people in certain areas. We were talking about just a couple of people, and it's Democrats and Republicans who are like this down there. They get their guys, they get their lady, and that's who they want to run. How has your campaign been received? That's the one thing I was interested in when I was first reading about you.
Well, it's been very well received, even before I ever announced as a candidate, because as I was around South Florida, I returned there basically the day I retired from the United States Army, and it just happened that there weren't a lot of young amputee veterans that were getting around South Florida, and immediately people became curious. And so it didn't matter if I was going to a Republican meeting or a Rotary meeting or something else. People started to say, hey, will you just tell us a little bit about your service? Maybe tell us a little bit about your experience with the VA, or tell us a little bit, about what you think of, in national security, or what's going on with this. And people were naturally curious. So it was in that light that people gave me the opportunity to speak to them anyways, and it gave me a chance to get out there and to know so many of the people in my area. It was great.
Do you think that Americans' attitudes towards who they feel most comfortable with and who they trust more in elected office is changing? Because used to it was, well, if you're not some like super rich businessman, then what are you doing? I've always thought that we need more veterans, especially as foreign policy becomes something bigger and bigger on the stage, and especially as it is quite evident that we have people in Washington, D.C. Our president just said yesterday at the G7 summit, well, we don't have a strategy for ISIS, which just blew my mind. How can you get up there on an international stage and say this?
I think that's a bold-faced lie for the president to say that we don't have a strategy. There is a strategy out there. There's probably numerous strategies that our military leaders have put forth, but the president is more interested in having a politically correct strategy than having the right strategy that's going to protect Americans and that's going to keep our soldiers as safe as they can possibly be on the battlefield.
And what kind of message, too, does that project to our enemies overseas? Oh, we don't have a strategy for this. I'm trying to understand.
Unfortunately, this is the message that's continuing from this administration, whether you're talking about the administration, wanting to cut deals with Iran, wanting to ignore, other acts of terrorism that are going on, whether you're talking about, Boko Haram or other groups that are out there targeting Christians.
Right.
Just this morning we read about 88 more Christians apprehended, groups out there that are beheading and that are, proposing suicide bombings and that are doing everything else out there as these acts of radical Islamic terror. And the administration has largely turned its back on this threat.
And there are even people within the base of the party that supports the administration that don't feel comfortable and don't have confidence in their leadership. And foreign policy and domestic security as well. They've always been, you know, like in the top, at least the top 6, the top 5 concerns. Every exit poll of every election, you know, you go and you ask all the people who are voting, what are your top 3 issues? I mean, it's always like the economy and this, but a lot of people, especially in 2012, we saw an increase in this, that this is, people are aware, they see these images overseas, and they also realize that we have had threats and attempted attacks here at home, and successful attacks, like in Boston.
Boston, 2 World Trade Center bombings, Fort Hood. You know, you can go overseas and look at other attacks, not just on the battlefield, but, you know, the USS Cole bombing, bombings of our embassies. You know, this is something that's been going on for generations, this threat of radical Islam. It's not something that's completely new to us, but it's something that, yeah, we need to take this fight to the enemy. We need to find them, we need to hunt them, and we need to kill them. And that's what they know. Obviously, they're not looking to have their hearts and minds won. They're looking to come over there and do that exact same thing to us, to find us, to hunt us, and to kill us. And we need to take that fight to them.
Your biggest, most pressing issue, if elected?
Government accountability. I think this is something that spans over so many issues, whether you're talking about national security, Obamacare, VA care. I think accountability is something that, you know, really needs to be at the forefront of everything. You know, I tell people, for myself, as somebody that, you know, listen, I say my legs aren't growing back anytime soon. You could consider me 100% and permanently disabled if that's how you wanted to look at it. And right now, even though I get around perfectly well, I never use a wheelchair, I've worked every day since retiring from the military, I could go and start collecting Social Security tomorrow if I wanted to, even though I've proven that I can go to work every single day. That's a hole in the system. That's a problem, you know, and that's something that shouldn't exist. We need to be out there, you know, basically promoting our principles above all else, and hope that policy follows those principles.
Where can people find you online? Your website, it's mastforcongress.com.
Mastforcongress.com.
Thank you, Brian, so much. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Folks, do you remember the story of Stefan Josie, the young man who was wrongly arrested for legally owning a firearm? We have a great update on that story after this.